here with Krysta.
Hello.
And her project is on queer time. So I'm going to ask Krysta a few questions about that. So, number one, how does time follow a heteronormative regime?
So there's this thing when it comes to time that we follow called the life course theory. It's really prevalent in psychology. You'll hear things like the social clock. The general idea is that you're born, you have a childhood, you go to school, you graduate, either you go on to higher education or you marry, you have kids, you get a job, grow old, die. And that's the cycle that you're supposed to follow endlessly. But the whole idea of there being a set normal for time kind of complicates the idea of the life course theory, because there's a lot of different people with different experiences who don't follow that pattern the same way. I mean, an immediate example that comes to mind is child-free women who electively or can't have children or decide not to have children. Immediately that puts a wrench in what the life course theory says that they're supposed to have. So instead of having children, they elect to not have children, and so they push back against the idea that this is what normal is or what is expected to be. And in doing so, they queer the idea of what a normal time is supposed to look like.
Wow. So are you saying that you don't necessarily have to be queer to follow a queer time?
That's just exactly what I'm saying, yes.
That's so cool. Can you talk to me a little bit about what liminal space is? Because this was like your favorite thing.
It was my favorite thing. I think it'll still remain my favorite thing decades in the future. But the idea of liminal space, typically speaking, people just kind of think in black and white areas. So there's the right answer, there's the wrong answer. But the answer that's in between, the gray area, that's where the liminal space rests. And when it comes to queer time, for instance, like there's a lot of people who kind of exist in that liminal space. One example that jumps to mind immediately are people with disabilities. People with disabilities exist in a space where time kind of moves slower for them. It's something that they've called crip time, which is short for cripple time. And that getting from one space to the next space might take an able-bodied person 5 minutes, but it might take them a half an hour to get there. And so there's time in which normal life course, and quote or heavy air quotes here, but normal life course operates at a certain way that their life course doesn't. And when it comes to crip time, a lot of what we'll see is this idea of liminal space. So life course theory, born, school, marriage, kids, death. But when you are born with a disability, or when you develop a disability, typically speaking, that means that there's a time in your life where you don't really know what's wrong, or you don't fit the way that other people seem to fit around you, and so you exist in that slower space. And when it comes to diagnosis is when you see liminal space most often. Because if, say, you have chronic pain, you're struggling, and everybody else can go and do whatever you want or whatever they want, but you're stuck in place. You feel like you can't progress because the pain is keeping you there, but until you get a diagnosis, there's nothing you can do. And so you're stuck in that in-between space of you can't go backwards, because that's not how time works, typically speaking, but you also can't move forwards because you don't have the tools or any resources in which you could feasibly move forwards.
Wow, that's such a great idea. It's such an interesting concept to think about our lives, even if we aren't disabled or aren't queer. It challenges so many binaries.
Exactly.
Okay, so how does the way that we measure time create different experiences? And you kind of just talked about that, but could you give me an example of how that very construct of time, shapes how we live our lives?
I can, because everybody experiences time in different ways. Even within groups, no two people experience their lives the same way. We talked a lot about like genealogies and like origins this semester, and it kind of plays into the same idea here. Like a lot of the times, one example that I had mentioned that I remember Anne had told me that she hadn't even thought about was part of my project was to do with cleaning. And you'd never thought, or you'd never think about time and cleaning going in the same space, but like again, it creates an idea of different experience. We, unfortunately, live in a capitalistic society in which this
Always gotta
idea
say,
is always going to come back to capitalism.
yes.
Anytime I can, I will take it there.
Me too.
Good. We fit even better then. But this whole idea that, capitalism very clearly states that the only way to be a moral, progressive citizen is to move forwards, to produce, to consume, to, create. And when you compare this idea of creation as like the penultimate, like that's what we would call, normal time or chrononormativity is the big academic word that goes with it. But then we have people typically relegated to, cleaning positions. And we think of them differently. And I'm using a broad we here.
Mm.
But a lot of the problems that arise with cleaning come from the idea that they don't produce, they maintain. So things get dirty and they go backwards, and it's the job of somebody who's cleaning to move them forwards again, but not too far forward, only to like a static place in time.
Wow.
And so we don't think about that being productive or creative or moving forward in any way. It's just, again, it comes back to like a liminal area in which we can kind of think about this as like they're not doing anything. And so therefore this creates this whole different experience of time. It's like somebody who's being productive can say, well, at least, I'm morally being productive, I'm contributing to society, but this person, they're just maintaining, they're just stuck there, which is a big reason as to why, housework or unpaid work is so stigmatized.
Absolutely. So capitalism keeps time and space moving forwards all the time.
Absolutely.
All right. Perfect. That is so sad.
I know. Yes. It was like the worst part of the project for me. It's like, oh, it comes back again, exactly like this. Great.
We're truly Marxists in this program, I believe.
We are. But I did find a fantastic part of my project that did talk a little bit about questioning this idea of progress.
Ooh, do you want to expand?
I will absolutely do that because it was the one that threw me so much. But we have this belief that, to be civilized is a good thing, but to be savage is not. And that there's this progression from savage to civilized. But I had read an article about about a book called the Hatum Brothers, in which colonialism came to a kind of a metaphorical Amazon rainforest, and it kind of acted a bit like a fairy tale in that there were three brothers. One brother was absolutely for colonialism, said that like they would bring progress and amazing things to the group of people that he lived in. Middle brother wasn't entirely certain, but really like valued and respected his older brother. And so clearly the older brother has the right idea. But the third brother said there's nothing wrong with the way that we're living our lives right now, and you have no idea what they're going to bring to us. What's wrong with us now? You can't predict what's going to happen. And as it follows, colonialism came, and they talked a lot about like destroying history in that book, in that when the white settlers came in and introduced the idea of capitalism and colonialism with it, a lot of the people who had lived in the Amazon were encouraged to like burn relics or any kind of historical artifacts, even if they'd been, centuries old, because it was, it reminded them of like being so unprogressive, stuck in time. Like, don't look to the past, look to the future. And
Wow.
in the end, like, the middle brother realizes that his older brother, or his younger brother rather, the one that didn't want to allow colonialism, was right all along.
Mm-hmm.
And it really problematized this idea that civilized meant better, because it conceptualized this idea, like, savage in the book meant a connection to family and togetherness and egalitarianism, and a real focus on the betterment of, like, a society of people as a whole, and then compared civilization to this cold colonial capitalism in which individualism was most important. And it sharply contrasted that hierarchy and showed that the older brother, who was all for capitalism, was still trying to be all for capitalism, but he was on the bottom rung of the ladder and struggling and
Mm-hmm.
basically killing himself to try to be white when he couldn't be.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot. So thank you so much for answering my questions.
Of course, it literally was my pleasure. I got to be happy and rant about queer time. I'm stoked.
You're so cool.